Hello and welcome everyone to the quarterly Onshape Review live stream. We're really excited to have you. This is going to be a great presentation of the recent Onshape improvements, and we couldn't be more thrilled to go through them with you. My name is Cody Armstrong. My title is Senior Director of Technical Services for the Onshape team here at PTC, and I'm very fortunate, as always, to be joined by our Head of Product, Greg Brown.
Thanks, Cody. Good to be here again.
Yeah, this is always our favorite presentation. We're going to go through all the recent improvements in Onshape over the last quarter and give you a little bit of insight into what's going on here at Onshape recently. Now, if you haven't attended one of these live streams in the past, we want to give you more than just what you would see in the What's New forum posts or the blog posts if you follow those. So we want to give you not just the what, the improvements, obviously, that we've had in the last quarter, but also a bit of the why. And that's really why it's great to have Greg, our head of product, on here, because it gives a little bit of that background into what we're focused on and some of the reasons behind that. So not only are we going to give you the what, here's some of our favorite improvements with demos, our favorite part, but also a bit of the why. What's the underlying logic behind it, and what's the motivation behind doing these, and how do they affect the bigger picture in terms of Onshape. And so that's really the idea behind the quarterly reviews, is a combination of both what did we do over the last quarter, and then why did we focus on those things. Now, to give you a brief recap as to where we are so far this year, we're about 6 months into 2025 and 8 really exciting releases. And if you haven't been following Onshape so far in 2025, the first quarter of Onshape was crazy with the improvements that we had. We had Cam Studio, we had Onshape Government, we had all of these really great features added in just the first quarter of 2025. So we really hit the ground running, and we pushed that into the second quarter as well with lots of great improvements, like the topics that we're going to discuss here today. I will say this quarter was a bit different in terms of our focus. I'm going to go over some details of that, and Greg will jump in just a moment. But it is something that we made a pivot to focus on some of the core aspects of Onshape with this quarter, and then we're going to go through those with you here today.
And but before we go on, Cody, I mean, just for some people who might be joining us for the first time, those numbers that are on the chart there, the 1.198, 1.199, these denote the release, the version that we're at. And it's a little bit arbitrary, but the next one seems like it's a pretty exciting milestone. We're treating it like any other, of course, but it's amazing to think that there's been that many releases. I think, as Cody said, there's 17 every year. The pace is relentless, and we're really not taking our foot off at all.
Yeah, 200 release. That's what Greg's referring to there. So we are almost our 200th release, and just a sneak peek into it, there's some really exciting stuff coming in that 200th release. So as Greg said, we're not slowing down. I think that we're only speeding up, and 2025 is going to be a record year for us in terms of the product. So really thrilled to be here, and really thrilled to dive into some of these new improvements over the last few months. So before we get into the nuances, I want to go over just at a high level what we focused on in this quarter. And I think you'll see this as we go through today's presentation. Their focus was really on the core. Core modeling made a big, was represented well in this quarter, and you're going to see lots of improvements around core modeling. And I think that's an area where a lot of people appreciate it. It's one of those things where it will impact a huge audience of Onshape users, because it impacts things like sketching and core feature regeneration, repairing geometry, things like that. So, the core, I would say, is the major theme for the last quarter in Onshape. And that extends not just to, core modeling features like I discussed just a moment ago, but also investing in Onshape's foundation. And that's something I think that is really valuable. Something we got a lot of feedback from users on was they really appreciated that time spent investing in Onshape's foundation. And what I really wanted to do was kind of pass things over to Greg and give a brief breakdown into what we did this quarter to focus on, the stability and performance of Onshape.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. And definitely this is something a little bit different from the regular schedule of, the 17 releases every year. We jam as many fantastic new things as possible every release. And the Onshape's platform is getting wider, broader, and deeper in every possible way. But we did make a very strategic decision in this last quarter to spend 2 whole releases that were dedicated to what we call technical debt. And these, some of the things here, as Cody said, are really dedicated to ensuring that the core, the foundation, the underpinnings of the Onshape platform are as robust and scalable and solid as ever, right? And also providing a platform that will go us many, many, many years into the future. So the dedication of that is really around 2 things. Firstly, stability and performance, right? So this is why we did it. We want this, Onshape to be faster and more stable, more robust than ever before, and providing this, trajectory into the future as well. We know this is the number one expectation these days. We don't get or expect kind of a free pass on, because you're the only true cloud native running in a web browser, CAD and PDM system, that anyone gives us a pass for anything less than stellar performance and stability. And we pride ourselves on that. And if we can be better, we will always try and be better. And that's our dedication to that. And how we're doing that is some of these other points in here. So we're addressing reported issues, issues that have come in through our support systems, and we're prioritizing those that sort of cause disruption in workflows. At the same time, we're making architectural improvements. So there are core areas of several key areas that we're needing to strengthen to move to scale, so we can provide powerful and innovative features in our future releases. And also, we take a look at this, what we call technical debt. These are areas of the product that are needing of refactoring. I mean, any code can be refactored and should be refactored on a regular basis. And we look at that and we decide that there may be reasons to do that, both for the platform and for customer-facing things, but also for our own internal workflows, such as support, QA, technical operations and documentation and other things. So, that was a really important thing to us to dedicate valuable time to, and this is valuable and the most valuable stuff that we could be doing. And this is not something we do every quarter. While all this was going on, though, I'm going to hand it back to Cody, because it wasn't just about technical debt.
That's right. We actually have a lot of really exciting improvements to talk about in this quarter. So even with the technical debt that Greg was just referring to, we have a lot of really awesome improvements to discuss with this quarter. So really exciting stuff that I'm going to dive into. Greg and I are both going to give you demonstrations of some of these highest level things. Important to keep in mind, these are just a handful of our favorites, as always, that came with this quarter, but there's a long list, and I'll give you a link to where you can go find more details later on. But really exciting improvements in this quarter that I think a lot of users will appreciate. With Mate, one of the most requested Mate types that we've had for a long time now inside of Onshape. Really exciting. Greg has an awesome demonstration of it to show you later. Repair Manager, another example of using our architecture to our advantage. I'm going to go over an example of why I think Repair Manager is such an epic tool now. And it takes something that was a tedious task and makes it very easy, and uses our architecture to improve that core CAD experience. We also have a new Constraint Manager, which I know users out there will really appreciate and enjoy, because it's so essential to the Onshape product is the ability to define constraints in the sketch level. Sheet Metal Cone, we're constantly evolving sheet metal tools. This is just one example of the sheet metal tools that we've added in over the last few months or so, but there's many that we know we're focused on. And sheet metal is one of those areas of improvement where we're spending a lot of energy, and Sheet Metal Cone is an example of that. But also really awesome transparency improvements. Some really neat transparency options that give you all additional capabilities, but also the ability to make your model look really awesome. And then, as always, there's always a long list of rendering improvements, drawing improvements, things that we don't have an opportunity to get to in explicit detail, but do want to make sure we highlight, because it shows that there's this steady drumbeat of releases that are improving all of these areas that are important to Onshape. But again, just to stress, a lot of really exciting stuff happened in this quarter, and we think our users will really appreciate that. So without further ado, I want to dive right into things. I'm going to go through a handful of improvements I've picked out. I'm going to show you some demonstrations of them. I'm going to go pass things over to Greg, and he can do the same. And I'd like to start with the Constraint Manager. And this is one that I think a lot of users will really appreciate. And going back to my theme earlier, you'll see a lot of what I'm going to show you today is just core Onshape, core CAD capabilities. And then not only are we improving the core CAD experience, we're doing it in a way that's very unique to Onshape. And Constraint Manager is a great way, or a great example of that. So what is it? Well, it's a detailed, filterable list of all sketch constraints, and it gives you the ability to highlight conflicts, external references, contextual references. It has all these really awesome filtering options that allow you to dig through your constraints and find the one that you're looking for. And I think that's really what this is about, is the ability to dig through and find that one constraint or conflicting constraints and quickly solve that problem, not have to hunt through the entire sketch to find the constraints that you're looking to find. So it's one of those things I think a lot of users will really appreciate, and brand new. Also in this quarter was improvements to the Repair Manager. Now, if you haven't used the Repair Manager, I'm going to show you how to use it in just a moment. What's really a game changer here is the ability to forward propagate references when using the Repair Manager. And I want to take a second to explain why this is a big deal. This uses Onshape's architecture. The Edit Last Healthy Moment in general uses Onshape's architecture, in particular versions and history, to find that last healthy moment and allow you to compare the two in a repair panel. And if you haven't used Repair Manager yet, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic tool for fixing your models, right? Fixing broken references, whatever the situation may be. Again, going back to core CAD capabilities, your fixing broken references is something we always have to do at some point. And so this gives you a tool to make that easier and faster. I'm going to go over not just the ability to use it, but how do we propagate forward those changes? So if you have a change to a reference, how do you change it in one place and then push that to all the places where that reference was used? That's really what the improvements around Repair Manager are about. And it's something I think is really a game changer for those that are manually repairing geometry or references today to use that Repair Manager. I'm going to go over an example of why I think this is such a big deal in just a moment. But definitely one of the areas that I would highlight as something we've done that's very unique to Onshape. And of course, sheet metal. And I mentioned this before, but sheet metal is a core area of focus for us. It's one of those things that we know a lot of users really appreciate. And one of the most requested features we had was the ability to create a conical or cone-shaped sheet metal part, a rolled sheet metal part in the shape of a cone. And we've had the ability to do this for a cylinder for some time, but conical shapes were a limitation that's no longer there. So if you're doing a lot of rolled sheet metal cone-shaped parts, this is the tool for you. And I'm going to go over an example of how to use it in just a moment, but it's one of the most requested sheet metal features that we have, and is one that I think a lot of users would really appreciate as they start to dive into things. So that's sheet metal cone, something I think a lot of users will really, sheet metal users especially, will really appreciate. And of course, going back to that core CAD theme, drawings. Now, there's a long list of drawing improvements that I could highlight here. So, like I always say, this is just cherry picked, the top improvements that we want to highlight. Definitely go through the what's new, go through the change logs if you really want a deep dive into those improvements. What I really want to highlight is I think two improvements that a lot of users requested, and a lot of users will really appreciate. And they're subtle things. They're kind of quality of life improvements, but I think will make a big difference in day-to-day interactions, the day-to-day process of creating drawings. The first, automatic center marks. Like if you have linear patterns and you're using lots of linear patterns in your geometry, adding center marks was a tedious task in the past, and that's totally automated now. And you don't have to do anything for it. It's just there as a default behavior. And it's a really awesome thing to enable for our users. But also another one that was really highly requested was the ability to define projected views and section views on views with breaks. That was something that many users requested. So if you do a lot of break views, the limitations around the ability to project or section from that were there in the past, but they're no longer the case. And so now these things are possible. These things were highly requested. Drawings is one of those things with a long tail of capability or functionality, and we want to make sure that we support every possible view option and pattern option. So drawing improvements, definitely one of the areas that got, if you were to just count sheer number of improvements over the last quarter, this is one of the areas that got the most attention. But the two that I would really highlight are really quality of life improvements that I think a lot of users will benefit from: automatic center marks and the ability to project and do section views off of a break. So Without further ado, I'd like to dive right into a few examples of this. So bear with me for a moment. I'm going to jump into Onshape here. And I want to start with the constraint manager. And the reason I think this is so important is it's because it's something that we do all day long. So if you do a lot of parametric CAD, you inevitably are faced with a situation where your sketch looks like this, right? And you have red errors everywhere, and maybe you add a dimension or constraint, and suddenly everything blew up, and you don't know how to fix it. And so oftentimes what we did in the past is you would manually hunt through and figure out what was the last constraint I added, what's it conflicting with, let's delete this, try that, and so on. But there was never a way to just look through the entire list of constraints and pick them out, or to filter them by a specific subset or category. That's what the constraint manager really gives you. And so I can't recommend this tool enough. This is something I think will impact all Onshape users out there, and it's something I think they'll really appreciate. In the sketch dialog, you'll have a little button that says Sketch Diagnostics. And in that, you'll see the new Constraint Manager. That's how you launch the Constraint Manager. You'll see the dialog pop up here. And what's really neat about this is, of course, you can do things like filter. That's really, in my opinion, one of the biggest applications for this is I just want to know, show me all the coincident constraints, right? I can do that. I can select coincident, and here are all the coincident constraints in this sketch. But what's really nice is you could do multiple layers of filters. So let's say, show me all the constraints, the coincident constraints that have an error. Now I have that one, right? So I can see that constraint. Or I can filter by other things. Show me all of the external constraints. Of course, external constraints are geometry that's constrained to something outside of that sketch. But now you have a quick way to filter that and say, show me the constraints that are just external or internal. One of my personal favorites is actually in context. If you ever do a lot of in-context design, knowing which constraints are tied to a contextual relationship rather than just the sketch is a really useful tool. And the ability to just filter by that quickly, I think, is something that a lot of users will really appreciate. But again, the things I would stress is just the ability to filter through and find all of the, aired constraints that you may have, or all the coincident constraints you may have, or the external constraints you may have. And I think one of the common applications for this is I have a sketch. Everything is aired out. I don't know why. Maybe I just want to purge all the overdefined constraints and start fresh. And it's easy for me to just select errors, delete all, and it purges all of those constraints that have an error. Now you can sort, last thing I'll mention about this, you can sort by combinations of things, like I mentioned before. You can sort by constraint, which is what we've been seeing here, but you can also sort by entity. And I think that's a really useful one because oftentimes when you have a conflict, it's between two things, two lines or alignments or whatever the combination of geometry may be. And this gives you kind of the insight on a entity level rather than a constraint level. And so if you're trying to troubleshoot specific lines or circles or arcs or whatever it may be, sorting by entity is probably the more useful way to filter through that data. But again, just to stress, this gives you that layout, that list of your constraints where you can go through and delete and move them around as you see fit. But the big thing is you now have a place to filter and show all of those constraints in a single location. So that is the constraint manager. Again, you'll find it in the sketch diagnostics option in the sketch dialog. Now, a brief aside, a brief tangent while I'm in the sketch diagnostics. This did not come in the last quarter, and I believe it was the end of last year. But the Profile Inspector is also in this sketch diagnostics. If you haven't used Profile Inspector, highly recommend it. It's a great tool for finding small profiles or small gaps in your sketches that could be causing problems. So just a quick plug, if you haven't used Profile Inspector, it's about 6 months old now. We've had it for some time now, but it is one of those areas that I think a lot of users will really appreciate. The ability to find the tiny lines or tiny gaps and quickly isolate them, fix them, is something a lot of users requested. And going back to the core CAD theme, core CAD is profile inspecting, it's constraint managing, it's fixing core sketches. And that's really what we're focused on here. So the tools for the constraint manager, those are things that every user at some point will benefit from. And it doesn't matter what kind of products you design, there's a strong chance Constraint Manager is going to be part of your day-to-day workflows. And the same goes for Profile Inspector. Both of these I would define as kind of core CAD features that everyone's going to use and really benefit from. So that is Constraint Manager with a quick plug for Profile Inspector. If you haven't used it yet, highly recommend checking that out. All right, so that is the constraint manager. The next thing I would like to highlight is the improvements around repair manager. Now, repair manager isn't new. What we've really done is made an improvement that is so awesome that we really need to take a moment to highlight it here. And I really wanted to take a second to not only show you repair manager and kind of the core of how it works, but why forward propagation is so important. So here's an example. I have this pump that I've imported. This is an imported model, but I've built all of these reference features off of it. So if you ever worked with a model, you import it, you build all these kind of contextual relationships, maybe features downstream of that imported model, and then you get a new import, right? And then you need to replace all those references. And if you've ever done this, it's not uncommon to see a feature list that looks like this, where once that initial import has been changed, all of the references below it may break, right? Now, it's not a given, but in many situations, that is the case. It will break those references and you have to go back through and replace them. And we've all dealt with situations where you make a change and it causes a kind of domino effect of red errors. And it's just the nature of parametric CAD. But what we've done here is really change how you fix these problems. And the reason I like this, the reason I like to stress this is because we're using Onshape's architecture, our cloud-based architecture that automatically tracks versions and history. We're using that to make the core CAD experience of fixing errors better. And I think that's the message that I would send is, fixing errors can be a tedious thing. It's not a fun task. It's something that people don't generally enjoy doing. And you just want to get it done and move on and start building new things. That's what this helps you to do. It allows you to make a quick fix on a model, push those changes for those references down to other features that may also be referencing that, and fix things much faster than you would otherwise. Now, I want to take one step back. If you haven't used the Repair Manager, I highly recommend it. It's one of those tools that I think once you really start diving into it, you won't go away. It's not a tool you'll use once. You'll use it and then realize it's awesome and use it in every situation to fix a broken reference. But if you haven't tried it, you just right click on a feature that's failing. You'll see a moment, an edit healthy moment of that feature. And what this is doing is it's looking through our versions and history, and it's finding the last time that feature successfully regenerated. And then it's showing you that in the right-hand side. And so you see there, as soon as I hit edit last healthy moment, a flyout pops out from the right, and it says, this is the last moment where that feature was healthy. And this is the thing that it was selecting. And you can see it there. It's highlighting the face that I've chosen to define for this extrude feature. And the reason this is so important is I can see, okay, a month ago when this was regenerating successfully, that face was the selected entity that drove this extrude feature. So I should replace that with this. Now, that has been around for a few months now. Repair Manager has been around for a few months now. What's really awesome and what's really different with this release, the thing I would stress, is this little icon inside of here for replace references. And so if you click this, it'll say, okay, here's your missing reference. What do you want to replace it with? And so all I have to do is select the face I want to replace it with. In this case, I'm just selecting the new face on the new imported model. But what's really critical here is this is not only replacing the reference in this feature, it's going to go through the entire feature list and find any references to that face and replace those as well. And so really critical, if you find yourself in a situation where you make a change high up in the feature list and suddenly there's this domino effect of errors that come from, well, chances are replacing some of those references and pushing those or propagating those changes forward will fix things very quickly. And so here's an example where, I have Extrude 2, Sketch 4, all of these three features are dependent on this one to exist. And you may have a situation where you've built hundreds of features that are dependent on a single feature to exist. And if that happens, then you can see, the domino effect and the amount of time spent fixing it is very laborious. This allows you to say, find this missing reference and replace it in any place in the feature list where it's used. And so now all I have to do is hit the green check. And now I've not only fixed Extrude 2, but I've also fixed Sketch 4 and Extrude 4 that were referencing that same face. And again, I could have 20 more, 30 more features on top of that that would have also been fixed and forward propagated to fix that issue as well. So it's one of those things I think will make a big difference in, day out. This is one of those things, again, core CAD, everyone experiences errors at some point. Regen errors are just a natural part of parametric CAD, going back through and fixing those references, an important part of parametric CAD, and something that we are now doing, I think, in ways that are better than anyone else can because of our architecture, because we have the history and we can see every moment and then push those changes forward. And the thing I would say about Repair Manager is we shipped it as soon as it added value, right? We shipped it as soon as you had the repair panel and the ability to cross-highlight and fix things interactively, because we saw that added value. But as soon as we had forward propagation, we added that too. And it's not done. You know, this is one of those things that we're going to continue to evolve, because fixing references is one of the most common tasks that users experience. And if we could make that smoother, easier, it's important to us. And so it's one of those things that I think is really noteworthy. And I wanted to go out of my way to really highlight that. Not only highlight it, but highlight the fact that we're using our versions and history to make fixing errors better. And that's something that I think a lot of users will really appreciate.
And Cody, you made a really important point there about the incremental delivery of this kind of foundational feature. In fact, it's interesting to think back. I remember last year, it was almost to the day a year ago that we released this as an early visibility feature to a few people. It wasn't quite as hot as today is in this end of June, but it was certainly almost exactly a year ago. So yeah, it's interesting that we can deliver value and incrementally increase that for something like this.
Yeah, and it's just a bit of a teaser that, you know, we're not done. You know, this is an area that's exciting, and I think it's one of those things that impacts everyone. And I think that, you know, a lot of users, once you start using Edit Healthy Moment, I think it's one of those tools you never go away from. And you never go back to the old way of fixing geometry once you have that interactive means of fixing your
unless you don't make any mistakes, and then you don't need it.
Yeah. But that's one of those things, again, that, you know, to me, when I saw it, I was like, wow, you know, as someone who's come from a traditional CAD background, to use the architecture and the history and the ability to track every interaction as a tool to fix the geometry is just genuinely awesome. And it's something I think that really sets Onshape apart. All right, so the next one that I want to talk about, this is one of the most highly requested sheet metal improvements that we have. And so for all the audience out there that's doing sheet metal design, I think you're going to be the ones who really appreciate this one the most. And that is the ability to create a sheet metal cone. And so, or conical sheet metal part, right? So if you're in this situation where you're creating rolled sheet metal parts, and we had the ability to do this with a cylinder some time ago, but cones have been a limitation until recently. And again, you know, the example I'm showing you here, there's a concrete bucket constructed using sheet metal, rolled sheet metal parts that are welded on along a seam. And this is an excellent example where you might use sheet metal cone. And there's not much to show here. It just works now. And I think that's one of the things I love about Onshape is now when you select a conical surface, you get a flat pattern. There's nothing special about it. It's not a separate feature. You're using the same sheet metal model feature that you've always used. So if you create sheet metal parts, you know the sheet metal model. You have convert, you have extrude, you have thicken, you have the various ways of creating sheet metal parts. Now, when you select a conical face, it just works. And it gives you that ability to define a cone-shaped sheet metal part and see the flat pattern, the unrolled version of that sheet metal part, so that you can take it and roll it and have accurate values. But again, the thing I would stress about this, highly requested, a lot of users have asked us for this, and it's one of the things that was a top priority for us. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention about this is you see me using convert to do it, and that works great. You can also use thicken. In this situation, in the example I'm showing you here, both will work equally well, and both give you kind of the same end result. And so the thing I would say about this is, you know, the ability to create cone sheet metal parts is just like the Repair Manager, the next step for us. And one of the areas where we really hope, you know, you'll see that improvement, incremental improvement that Greg was just talking about as time rolls on. You know, the drumbeat of releases is never going to stop for us. And that's one of the areas that I think people really appreciate. So that is sheet metal cone and conical sheet metal parts, something I know a lot of users will get really excited about. The last thing I have to show you, I'm going to switch things over for Greg to do a few demonstrations, is an improvement around drawings. Now, as I mentioned before, if you were to take a list of all the improvements that happened over the last quarter, drawings is definitely high on that list, because just the sheer volume of drawing improvements coming with each release is big. And we don't always highlight them because they're not, always relevant to everyone, and sometimes they're smaller, bigger improvements. But some of these are quality of life improvements I think users will really appreciate. And they're subtle things, but if you do a lot of drawing creation, they're things I think you'll appreciate. So the example I want to show you here is just creating a drawing using linear patterned geometry. In this case, this is a centered linear pattern. Here I have a linear pattern of holes that are centered around that circular hole there. And I just want to create a drawing, right? So let's create a drawing, and we'll just choose a default template. And what I want to do is insert a view. There's nothing really different about this until that view gets inserted. So I'm going to go ahead and select that linear centered pattern part, and I'm going to drop this into my drawing. What I really want to stress here as I zoom in is notice all of the center marks that are automatically added. Now, in this case, I only have 5 patterned holes, but you can imagine if you had 30 patterned holes in your geometry, the process of manually creating center marks is just a tedious one in the drawing, and you just don't have to do that anymore. Automatically, when you insert a drawing view, you have those center marks available for you, and you don't have to do any manual steps to accomplish that. And I think that's something that, small quality of life improvement, but one that many users will appreciate, because again, if you did a lot of linear patterns, it could be a tedious task to go through and define center marks for each of them. So those are some of my picks for the last quarter, and some of the things I like to highlight. And I'm going to turn things back over to Greg.
Thanks, Cody. You probably can see my screen now. Yep. Okay, so let's talk about the WidthMate. The WidthMate, as Cody said, was one of the most requested types of assembly constraints and mates for a long time, and now it is in Onshape. So the WidthMate lets you easily center align parts in an assembly, and that's really important on its own. But you can do this between disjoint, non-parallel, and separate parts, and that's something that was really, really difficult before, when you tried to create a mate connector, but you couldn't really create the mate connector between 2 separate parts. And then you got into some trouble that way. So the WidthMate's allowing you to do that. What it is allows you to take 1 or 2 tab mate connectors and align them between 2 WidthMate connectors. Of course, you can select those implicitly from surrounding geometry, or you can use existing mate connectors that are there. Now, after you create a WidthMate, a translation in 2 directions and 1 normal rotation is allowed along the center plane that the WidthMate creates. This allows you then to apply additional mates, such as tangent C or planar mates, or cylindrical mates, however you need to fully lock it in, or you might want to leave some of those degrees of freedom open. Let me explain that in the form of a demonstration. So here we've got a seat rail, and I'm just going to put some kind of slot tab into it. So I've got my first WidthMate already done, and that is, you can see here, I've got 2 tab mate connectors. These are the faces here that are in orange, and then the WidthMate are down here on the other part here, which is a separate part. And this is now aligning this perfectly symmetrically or centered through there. Now, what it hasn't done yet is fully constrain it. It allows it to move in 2 translations that way, as well as a rotation this way. So in order to fully, say, fix this down or allow the degrees of freedom that I want, I'm actually going to apply a planar mate here. And you can see here, I've put a planar mate with a little offset. If I come in closely, you can see I've got an offset there. Now, this just leaves 1 degree of freedom, which is sliding up and down there, which I might want to leave, or I could apply, additional, say, a tangent mate between these 2 faces, or a planar mate between these 2 faces. You can use sort of these additional alignment type mates to really lock it down into the place you want it. This is a really simple one, and the benefit of this and the beauty of it is that these faces here, which are the WidthMate, don't have to be parallel. and they don't have to stay the same, right? They can change, and the width mate will accommodate that. This is sort of the reality of trying to put things into these kind of slot mechanisms. Right. Another example of this, in fact, this is a really simplified looking example, and it's on purpose because it can be kind of as a complicated thing, so we'll just use something simple here. And this actually came at us through the forum. Somebody was asking on the forum, on the What's New, we have a nice area where we discuss the things that are, what's new in basically in real time, right? So the problem is that this is a TV screen or a nice poster of your favorite software, and you want to put this on your wall, and you want to align it so that it's exactly centered between the roof rail here and the floor. And we're going to put it some offset off the wall. So first, I'm going to use a width mate, and you can see here again, I've just used a width mate with these two faces forming where the mate connector for the tabs are going to be. And then I'm just going to use the width mate from this rail here to the bottom of the floor there. Now, as before, this still allows us some degree of freedom on the plane. Now, this plane is the mid plane between these two width mate references, and it can also rotate right around that plane. So maybe we're not done yet. Maybe we want to add an additional planar mate to the back of the wall, and I've used an offset here, sort of 10 inches or something off the back of the wall, and we're nearly done. Just as before, there is still 1 degree of freedom left. That is this translation in the local X direction. So, if we wanted to really align it up with this edge here, we could add an additional planar mate or, again, tangent mate. These things add up quite nicely. And there's another example I know that Mike LaFleche put in the forum on the thread in the forum about doing this for sort of like a cylindrical shaft rotating between 2 pillar blocks or something like that. The third example, on this example here, to make it a little bit more interesting and show you a little level of complexity, I'm going to take out the perspective view so that you can see it directly side on. I've made this roof rail not not parallel to the floor. And in fact, you'll see as I rotate it, the bisecting angle is how we align the width mate. Right? You can see here the TV is maintaining sort of that bisecting angle. In fact, I can also move this up and down, and you see how it's perfectly remaining exactly between the top of the rail and the floor. So you can have some fun with this thing. It's a powerful assembly mate, and it's going to do make life a lot easier, especially when you get to some things like this assembly here, which is a nice scanning tool, and it's got a kind of a GoPro style mount. This is a really good example for you want to center this adjustment screw. You want to center the threaded portion here, and there's a little bit of a gap. You also want to center this tab into just exactly a good use of a width mate. You want to center this tab in between the slot here, and then perhaps you want to provide 1 or 2 more planar or tangency mates to set this in. So you can see here a very small number of 7 mates really took care of this whole assembly for me, and it made it very, very convenient. So that's the width mate. Let's go back to here. So the second area I want to talk about is a really nice quality of life and visual improvement, which is to do with transparency. We've always had transparency and isolate tools, but now we've given them a big boost because you can control the level of transparency in the tool. So you can see additional faces that are internal to the transparent parts. And this gives you a sense of what detail is going on inside. And you can see how some of the examples I've got here, it's a really, really nice way. If you want to use the old transparent, which is very uncluttered view, you can just slide this all the way to the left. And you can just change it, as you slide this thing, you'll see at different levels of that. A really, really important thing is this button here, which allows you to select the transparent geometry, even though you've made it transparent. So if you want to do things like measurements or other selections, you can, right? You just choose this option here and then start selecting. It also works really, really well with section views and measurements. And this is definitely worth seeing live. So something like this, and I see my watch is working a little bit fast. Okay, let's set it back. Okay, so here we are. I can make certain things transparent just by using the shortcut key. I've got Shift-T, all right? And you can see here that the new transparent mode allows you to see some of the internal faces, even though they've all become transparent. Now, to compare to the old way of looking things, or the other way of looking at things, this is what it used to look like. Right? You'd see the outside face, but you wouldn't see any of the internal details. So if you want to, you can just slide this across to give you the desired level. And depending on the model, that level is going to be to your taste, and it's worth doing that. So the other thing then you might want to do is something like this. Okay, let's build a section this time. Let's cut a section, and we're okay there. And now we're going to, say, use an isolate on 2 different parts. And you can see here, this is a really good example of seeing internal details, even though they're in the transparent kind of form. And now we're going to use the measure tool, and we can measure between even a transparent thing and something that's not transparent, something that's isolated. And here is the minimum distance between that transparent edge and the isolated edge there. So all of these tools really have come together really, really nicely and work together in concert. Like that. Another example of this is when this is a nice example because this is a mesh. The top is a mesh and the bottom is not. I can hide those edges. I use shortcuts for a lot of things, including hiding edges. And I can do a couple of things. I can either isolate the surface model, and you get a really, really cool look at what's going on inside this model, especially if we go back to the differential here. Again, I've got the select transparent geometry option turned on, so I can do things, like measurements between edges and just as we did before. It's a small thing, but it's a huge quality of life improvement, and creating images for marketing purposes or for just explaining to your boss what you're doing. This is a really, really, really nice improvement. And talking of quality of life things, there's another thing that is not on the list, but I'll just show it to you here anyway. The insert dialog here now can be resized. This is very nice when you have part studios or assemblies that maybe run on very long and you have to see what their real names are, or you've got other documents or paths or folders that have got long names. Now you can just stretch that dialog out. In fact, we've taken that sort of approach in other areas as well, including in the bill of materials. You can always do a horizontal scroll in the bill of materials so that it just allows you to see what you need to see. Again, these are little things, quality of life things that just add up over the course of a session or a day or a week using Onshape. And we're always thinking about this when we're thinking about people's core user experience with Onshape. Now, the last area is with Render Studio. So, we've talked a lot about Render Studio in the last year, since we did this a really big push to upgrade and modernize and Onshapeify Render Studio. And, we're continuing to do this. In fact, in the last quarter, we did 4, or at least 4, pretty major things. The first is, we can now match the scene properties of what you're currently working on in Render Studio to a previously created Render Studio tab, whether it's in the same document or even in another document. So we've got this thing called Match Scene Properties, and you can choose whether to match any or all of the settings here, like the scene itself. Then there's lots of controls over the renderer, whether you're going and matching the environment, which is essentially the lighting and the ground and the dome model, and then the named views. And the named views, there's a lot of things captured in a named view. Think of it as the camera all of the settings to do with the camera, things like the depth of field, the perspective settings, the position and rotation of the camera itself, the tone mapping, the clipping, even if the background, if you've got something like a nice backing plate in there, all of that can be copied in or referenced in from a previous successful shot that you've set up. That is this match scene properties and with the name views as well. The second thing is that when you're setting or specifying a field of view of your camera, it used to be that you would provide an angle, right? Now you can actually specify a focal length, which is much more familiar if you've ever used a camera. And these focal lengths of, say, 35 millimeters, corresponds to a 35 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. If you have a cropped frame camera, then just multiply it by that crop factor to get to the focal length that you need. It's a much, much easier thing. And seriously, I used to have a Post-it note sort of pasted to the side of my laptop here, which had the conversion between focal length and field of view angles. But now I don't need that anymore. And neither do you. The third thing is that you can easily right-click on a part and say, link back to the Part Studio and reset back to the Part Studio appearances for faces as well. If you have specified a face appearance in Onshape and then you override it in Render Studio, you can undo that overriding and go back to the Onshape appearance. Very, very easy now. And finally, the scene list. And the scene list in Render Studio is equivalent of the feature list in Onshape and the assembly parts list in the assembly mode. We have made that much more familiar to Onshape users in so much that it's got a split screen. And down the bottom, you have the appearances, and up the top, you've got the instances and the transforms and things like that. So in this case here, where I'm not really interacting with the assembly itself, I can sort of close that down and then concentrate on, the large number of appearances I've got in here. I can, and vice versa. I could pull this curtain down a little bit and concentrate more on the assembly. It just makes it a lot more usable for that. We have also added extensive number of filtering options into the scene list here. So if you want to filter and look for things like specific appearances or specific decals or specific transforms or specific entity types, you can do that just like you do in Onshape Part Studio or assemblies as well. So a lot has been going on in Render Studio, and a lot is going to continue. I'm looking forward to this time next quarter when we can explain some more. But for now, back to you, Cody.
Cool, thank you. And as always, Greg's demos are awesome. The things I liked about what you showed there, in particular, WithMate is awesome. But the neat thing about WithMate is the ability to select all the different combinations of things and still have it work. I think that's one of the things that I appreciated most. Is it doesn't have to be the same parts. It doesn't have to be, like you can have lots of different selection types and still calculate that width. And that's something I think that not a lot of users would know just diving into it at first. So that's one thing that I think that people will appreciate. But also, the new transparency options are more than just visuals, right? Like their ability to actually measure, like you showed there, is awesome. And you can now peel away at the design in a way that was not possible before. So, when we do these things, like one of the things we really prioritize is, how does it affect the user and the ability to make it more usable, and not just the ability to improve it aesthetically, but also the ability to take measurements from those is awesome. And section it and do all the things that you would normally do and use it as a tool to probe the model and not just visually look at it. I think that's something that really resonated with me, is like that's a really awesome capability that we didn't have in the past.
Yep.
All right, so to wrap things up here today, as we always say, this is really just a highlight reel of some of the things that we like to highlight. We like to highlight a handful of these things and then give you some ideas as to what the underlying motivation was behind them. But there is much more going on in the background, and we really only had the opportunity to cherry pick just a handful of improvements from the very large list of improvements that happened over the last few months. And so what you're seeing here is a screenshot of our changelog, and don't worry, I don't expect you to read every one of those. The idea here is it's a lot, and with every update, there's a long list of improvements that you really should check out. So if you really want to dive into the Onshape What's New. The forum posts are great, but also the change log. The change log goes into a lot of depth as to each individual improvement, even bug fixes and things like that. And so if you really want to dive into what's going on with Onshape in a lot of detail, go to onshape.com/changelog. Definitely a good URL to bookmark, and I think one that will give you kind of an idea of the scope and scale of the improvements that Onshape is pushing out there. As Greg said earlier, we're not putting backing off the pedal, right? We're putting our foot down, and this is kind of the evidence of that. The long list of changelog improvements that you see with each update. So really encourage you, go check out the What's New, check out the changelog, and dive into more depth into the features that we're showing here today. So we're going to wrap things up, and I want to wrap things up with just first off a simple thank you to the Onshape community out there. Greg mentioned this before. We pay close attention to the forums, and we pay close attention to your feedback, and in the product, the forums, and public places. That's something that really drives a lot of our decision making, and so a lot of what you'll see here is at least affected by your feedback directly, and we couldn't do this without you. So we really encourage you, please keep the feedback coming. That feedback is invaluable to us, and it's something that we not only look at, but act on. And I think that's something that people really appreciate about Onshape. So please continue submitting feedback and tickets, communicating with us on the forums, keep the feedback coming, and we will continue to improve Onshape as a result. So we really appreciate your time, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thanks again. Thank you.